This is Democracy Watch. So, Mark, a few days ago, the secret recording of Samuel Alito, the Supreme Court Justice, and his wife, Martha Ann Alito, were released thanks to Lauren Windsor from The Undercurrent. In those videos, Alito basically aligned himself with the right. He said there was no compromise with the left and that basically his side has to win, which raises this question now, given his egregiously unethical behavior. Is there anything that can be done to rectify this issue?
So look, the Supreme Court justices get appointed by the president, they get confirmed by the Senate, and they serve a life term during good behavior, right? So the key term here is good behavior. In order to remove a federal judge, any federal judge, including a justice, you'd have to go through the normal impeachment process, right? So that would mean starting in the House and going to the Senate for conviction. But so that's like the formal answer to your question. I think the informal answer, or the perhaps the more important one, is it is time for all responsible actors in our political and judicial system to speak up and just say that that there is a line, that there is a temperament that we expect from justices. And to his credit, the Chief Justice, if you look at his interview, actually showed that temperament. Like, he was basically the same person in private that on tape that you would expect. But that if you have justices who are having these one-on-one conversations, whether they are taped or not taped, and by the way, this was at an official event of the Supreme Court, is for the Supreme Court Historical Society, and they are expressing these views that are, suggest that there is a right side and a wrong side based on who the litigants are. That is a really big problem, and we need people to speak up on that. And the second thing I'd say is that the media has to start covering the Supreme Court and the Supreme Court justices like they are any other actors in Washington, D.C. It is notable that the publications he complains about, ProPublica, and the woman who brought this to everyone's attention, they are not the Supreme Court reporters, right? They are not the reporters who normally cover the Supreme Court, who you would expect would actually have the most access and insight to bring these kinds of stories forward.
Mark, does the fact that we heard this recording change anything that we knew about the unethical behavior of these Supreme Court justices?
Well, so look, I think the most interesting thing about it was that Justice Alito's wife suggested that there might come a time when he steps off the court so she could fly an anti-pride flag. There hasn't been a lot of commentary about that, but she laments at great length how she can't fly a flag to put a stick in the eye during Pride Month. But she says, I deferred for now, but when this is over, I'm gonna do it. And I assume by this is over, she means when he steps off the court. So I learned that. I mean, the other thing is, obviously, in all seriousness, you got a very sort of it is one thing for justices to have private religiosity, or not religiosity. Like, that's their faith is their business. Right. There certainly were suggestions in the answers that Justice Alito gave to suggest that he views the fights before the court, which are supposed to be legal, in quasi-religious terms.
Now, you brought up Martha Ann Alito. Samuel Alito keeps pointing basically the blame onto his wife for the controversial, flag issues that were flown on his properties. What do you take from the argument that these actions don't warrant recusal on Samuel Alito's behalf just because they were taken by his spouse?
Yeah, I've spoken out about this. I wrote about this on Democracy Docket. I find that about as unconvincing as any argument I've ever heard from a Supreme Court justice. I mean, the fact is, the standard for recusal is whether or not there is an actual or appearance of a lack of impartiality. And the idea that somehow it was her flagpole and there was nothing he could do because she either in one case owns the house, in the other case co-owns the house, strikes me as ludicrous. I mean, and it's actually kind of proved out by the fact that she says, I didn't fly the flag, the anti-pride flag, because of him, which
Right.
suggests that when he said to the, I forget which newspaper it was, that
The Times, yeah.
the Times, that he had asked her not to fly the upside down flag and she refused, it's not consistent with that. And so, but frankly, that doesn't even matter. It was his house. It is flying a flag upside down in the middle of the aftermath of an insurrection at the nation's capital as President Biden is being sworn in. There were other issues involving the timeline that he laid out versus what appears to be the actual timeline. So no, it does not matter to me who purchased the flag.
You're not deferring to property law when it comes to this argument from Samuel Alito. I think that's a great point that you brought up, because in that Times article, he said that he couldn't do anything about it. Basically, she wouldn't defer to him. She's her own person, and so if she wants to fly a flag, she could fly a flag. And then we heard in this recording, she basically comes out and says that she wishes that she could fly the Sacred Heart of Jesus flag to basically thumb her nose at the Pride flag, but that she won't do that because she's deferring to him. So one of these two people is lying, and clearly these stories aren't matching up. Mark, there has been some debate about whether it's even worth it to do something to hold Alito and, more broadly speaking, Clarence Thomas to account, since we don't have the numbers to actually, execute some type of impeachment in Congress. So because the ultimate outcome, is that they will likely skate by, it might not even be worth it to start. What would be the case for Congress to, at the very least, take initial steps to hold these justices accountable?
So look, I think there are steps before you get to the question of impeachment. I mean, you asked me earlier how he could be removed, but the legislative branch has a legitimate interest, and in this case, I would say an absolute need, to hold oversight hearings to understand what the scope of the problem is. I mean, the truth is, we shouldn't have to count on an undercover journalist to figure out the scope of the problem, right? We shouldn't have to count on amended returns, amended forms that ProPublica gets to figure out the scope of the problem. So, Congress oftentimes does oversight hearings of the executive branch, which is also a co-equal branch of government, just like the judicial branch, does oversight hearings to simply learn the facts so that they can figure out, for example, do we need a new code of conduct? Do we need a new disclosure regime? Do we need to have whenever you fly a flag in your house and you're a Supreme Court justice, you have to take a picture? I mean, who knows what it is, right? There are things that are well short of removing someone from office that congressional oversight can address. And I think that it is absolutely worth exploring what that is. You and I talked about this a few episodes ago. I thought that the Chief Justice made a mistake in not voluntarily agreeing to sit down with Senate leadership, because he is the head of the federal judiciary, and there are legitimate questions. I mean, look, there are questions here about why it is that the gift rules that apply to the judiciary are so elastic and so lax that they allow for the kinds of gifts. I mean, forget about whether they're disclosed. They are clearly, gifts are being disclosed that are in the millions of dollars.
Right.
And there is no parallel to that in either the congressional gift rules,
right.
or the executive branch gift rules.
These people would be, legislators would be in prison basically if they did the same thing that justices did, and they're no less important in our system of government than members of Congress or members of the U.S. Senate are. Let's finish off with this. Samuel Alito just authored a pretty devastating opinion in a racial gerrymandering case out of South Carolina that you and I spoke about in a previous episode. Can you speak to the implications of that decision and what it means, given that Samuel Alito wrote the majority opinion in light of what we're seeing now? Yeah.
So look, I mean, one of the most alarming aspects of that decision was that he said that the legislature and legislatures engaged in racial gerrymandering deserve a presumption of good faith, that we should assume that they were doing the right thing. And that sort of turns the history of the Civil War amendments, the 13th, 14th, 15th
Right.
amendments, on their head. Because those amendments were passed because Southern states were not doing the right thing. They had engaged in chattel slavery and then started the bloodiest war in American history.
Right, and so inherently they weren't entitled. They forewent their entitlement to the benefit of the doubt, basically.
Correct. Not only not the benefit of the doubt. I mean, one could imagine a sensible jurisprudence that says actually what the 14th Amendment says is you are intensely skeptical of state interpretation, and particularly the way in which they treat black people who were the direct intended beneficiaries of those amendments. And so, as I look at that case and try to reconcile it with the Colorado case, which was also a 14th Amendment case. This was whether Donald Trump should be excluded from the ballot, where Colorado made a judgment that he was an insurrectionist and should not be on the ballot. As I try to weigh those two, it is hard for me to understand why Colorado did not get the presumption of good faith, and yet the white legislators in South Carolina did get the benefit of good faith. And I don't think that what we have seen recently revealed from the Supreme Court is doing anything to repair the lack of confidence that people have in the court. If anything, it's making it worse.
Well, look, I think that it's important that we keep beating this drum. I know that you've been beating this drum over at Democracy Docket. So for those who are watching right now, if you want to follow along with this stuff, especially as it relates to the Supreme Court, please make sure to sign up for Democracy Docket. It's the free news outlet Marc founded to focus on everything voting in elections. It's an amazing resource that I use on a daily basis. I'll put the link right here on the screen and also in the post description of this video. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
I'm Marc Elias.
This is Democracy Watch.